My name is Travis, 28 years old, with a passion for entrepreneurship that started when I was just a kid. Family dinners were always a battlefield, but nothing prepared me for that night when my father publicly destroyed me to elevate my doctor's sister Megan. "She is a doctor, you are just worthless," he announced to a room full of guests. If only he could see us now. How dramatically the tables have turned. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button before I reveal how my worthless business changed everything. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, our family appeared picture-perfect from the outside. My father, Dr. Richard Parker, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. His reputation preceded him everywhere we went, at school events, neighborhood gatherings, country club functions. Teachers would recognize our last name and immediately ask if we were related to the brilliant Dr. Parker. My sister Megan was 3 years older than me, and from an early age she showed the academic promise my father wanted to see. She brought home perfect report cards, won science fairs, and seemed naturally drawn to medicine, or at least that was the narrative our father constructed. When Megan was 10, Dad brought her to the hospital for Take Your Daughter to Work Day and proudly paraded her around in a custom-made lab coat with future Dr. Parker embroidered on the pocket. The photos from that day still hung in his office decades later. Our mother, Catherine, was a kind woman who had abandoned her own career as a concert pianist to support my father's medical ambitions. She was gentle and loving in the quiet moments when Dad wasn't around, but transformed into a passive observer when he entered a room. Years of subtle criticism and dismissal had taught her to fade into the background. "Catherine, please," he would say, when she tried to interject in dinner conversations. "We are discussing important matters here." The important matters were always medicine prestige, and the family legacy Dad was determined to build. From my earliest memories, the comparisons between Megan and me were constant and crushing. When I brought home an A- in 5th grade science, my father barely glanced at my report card. "Megan never got anything less than an A," he remarked casually, as though this fact was common knowledge that needed no explanation. When I showed interest in business at age 12, starting a neighborhood lawn mowing service that expanded to include 5 other kids on my street, my father called it playing store. That summer I earned over $300, which seemed like a fortune to me. I proudly showed him the cash I had saved, explaining my system for tracking expenses and profits. "That is cute, Travis," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "But Megan is preparing for her future by volunteering at the hospital lab. That will actually lead somewhere." My mother squeezed my shoulder when he left the room. "I think it is very impressive," she whispered, but never loud enough for him to hear. High school brought more of the same. I maintained a solid 3.8 GPA, ran track, and started a student business club that partnered with local shops for fundraising events. But I wasn't valedictorian like Megan had been. I didn't get accepted to Johns Hopkins University with a full scholarship like Megan had. Every achievement I earned existed in the shadow of what my sister had already accomplished. Our family dinners were excruciating performances where my father would interrogate us about our academic progress and future plans. These weren't conversations, they were evaluations. "Travis, what was your score on the calculus exam?" he would demand between bites of whatever gourmet meal our mother had prepared. 92%, I would answer. He would respond, a familiar furrow appearing between his eyebrows. Megan got 98% on that same test. The fact that this had happened 4 years earlier made no difference. In our house, the standard had been set and I was perpetually falling short. When it came time for college applications, I knew I wanted to study business. Despite my father's pressure to apply to pre-med programs, I stood my ground for perhaps the first time. I was accepted to the State University's business program with a partial scholarship. The day my acceptance letter arrived, I felt a surge of pride that quickly evaporated when I saw my father's reaction. "State University," he scoffed, dropping the letter on the kitchen counter as though it were contaminated. "I didn't spend a fortune on private school tuition for you to attend a common state university. Their business program is ranked in the top 20. Nationally," I argued, feeling my face grow hot. "Business," he repeated the word itself, seeming to taste bitter in his mouth. "You are wasting your potential, Travis. The Parker name belongs in medicine." That was our first major argument, the beginning of a fracture that would eventually break wide open. I went to my room that night and sat on the edge of my bed, listening to my parents argue downstairs. My mother's voice, rarely raised, was defending my choice. My father's booming response made the floorboards vibrate. One doctor in the family isn't enough. The boy is throwing away everything we have built. I learned something important that night in my father's eyes. I wasn't just making a different choice. I was actively destroying his vision of our family legacy. The weight of that accusation would hang over me for years to come. College felt like taking my first real breath after years of swimming underwater. At State University, nobody knew my father or sister. Nobody compared me to the brilliant Dr. Parker or future Dr. Parker. I was just Travis, business major, eager participant in class discussions guy who always had a new idea to share. My professors in the business department recognized something in me that my father never had, a natural entrepreneurial mindset. Professor Martinez, who taught my Introduction to Entrepreneurship class, pulled me aside after a presentation on market gap analysis. "You think differently, Travis," he said. "You see connections and opportunities that others miss, that cannot be taught." Those words sustained me through many difficult moments in the years that followed. During my sophomore year, I started a small online business selling customized merchandise to student organizations and local businesses. I invested $500 from my savings to purchase a heat press and vinyl cutter, setting up shop in my cramped off-campus apartment. My roommates complained about the constant whirring of machinery and the smell of hot vinyl, but they came around when I started paying a larger share of the utilities. By junior year, my business was generating enough revenue to cover my portion of rent and groceries. I reinvested most of the profits, expanding into embroidery and screen printing. I created a website, learned about search engine optimization, and built a small but loyal customer base. Meanwhile, Megan was excelling in medical school at Johns Hopkins, just as everyone expected. Dad called me less frequently than he called her, but when he did, Megan's accomplishments were always the first topic. "Your sister just co-authored a research paper that is being published in the New England Journal of Medicine," he announced during one call, not bothering to ask about my own studies or business. "That is great," I replied automatically, the response worn smooth from years of repetition. "She will be starting her residency at Massachusetts General next year, following in my footsteps." I swallowed hard. "My business is doing well too, Dad. I am thinking about expanding into corporate gift packages next quarter." The silence that followed was familiar, a moment of recalibration, as my father processed information he considered irrelevant. "Well," he finally said, "I suppose it is good to have a hobby while you complete your degree." It wasn't a hobby. By the time I graduated with honors in business administration, my hobby was generating $30,000 in annual revenue. Not enough to make me rich, but enough to prove the concept had merit. I leased a small commercial space just outside the city center and hired my first part-time employee. My graduation ceremony should have been a celebration, but it was overshadowed by news that Megan had received a prestigious award for medical students. My parents attended my ceremony. Of course, appearances were important to my father. But his attention was elsewhere. During the family dinner afterward, he spent most of the time on his phone showing other guests photos of Megan accepting her award. After graduation, I moved into a small apartment and focused on growing my business. Those first years were challenging. I faced supply chain issues, intense competition from larger companies, and an economic downturn that affected small businesses disproportionately. Some months I barely made enough to cover expenses. During the worst periods, I took a side job at a retail clothing store, working evenings and weekends to make ends meet. Megan completed her residency and began practicing medicine at the same hospital as our father. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the Parker medical dynasty. There was no mention of the other Parker child, the one folding shirts at the mall and struggling to keep his small business afloat. Around this time, Megan got engaged to Andrew, another doctor she had met during residency. My father was ecstatic about the Dr. Power couple, as he called them. He threw an elaborate engagement party at his country club, inviting colleagues, family, friends, and several hospital board members. In my personal life, I had been dating Jessica for nearly 2 years. We met at a small business networking event where she was representing her graphic design company. Jessica understood my passion for entrepreneurship because she shared it. She believed in my vision, even when orders were slow and bills were piling up. Jessica's first encounter with my family was eye-opening for her. I had tried to prepare her for my father's personality and the family dynamics, but experiencing it firsthand was different. "I cannot believe how differently they treat you and your sister," she whispered as we drove home from a tense Sunday dinner. "It is like you are invisible until they need something to criticize." I shrugged, too accustomed to the treatment to be shocked anymore. "Welcome to the Parker family hierarchy. Doctors at the top, everyone else somewhere below sea level." Jessica squeezed my hand. "Their loss. You are building something real, Travis. Something that belongs to you." Her faith in me made the constant dismissal from my family somewhat easier to bear. And as it turned out, she was right. I was building something that would eventually force them all to see me differently. My father spared no expense for Megan and Andrew's engagement celebration. He rented the grand ballroom at the Westfield Country Club, hired a string quartet, and arranged for a 5-course meal prepared by a chef who had once appeared on a popular cooking competition show. The guest list included about 30 people, family members, close friends, and several prominent physicians my father wanted to impress. The invitation specified formal attire, so Jessica and I dressed accordingly. She wore a navy blue cocktail dress that made her eyes sparkle, and I wore the one good suit I owned, purchased for client meetings. Before we left our apartment, I received an email that sent a surge of adrenaline through my body. "Travis, great news," Jessica exclaimed, reading over my shoulder. "The deal with Northeast Retailers is happening." Northeast Retailers was a regional chain with 27 locations across New England. After months of negotiations, they had agreed to stock my custom apparel line in their stores, the first major retail partnership for my business. This could be the breakthrough I had been working toward for years. "This changes everything," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. "If this goes well, we could expand production, hire more staff, maybe even look at automating some processes." Jessica hugged me tightly. "I am so proud of you. Are you going to tell your family tonight?" I hesitated. "I do not know if an engagement party is the right time." "Travis," she said firmly, "this is huge news. Your family should know. You deserve to celebrate this win." We arrived at the country club and were directed to the ballroom, which had been transformed with elaborate floral arrangements and twinkling lights. My mother greeted us warmly, kissing Jessica on both cheeks. My father offered a distracted handshake before being pulled away by one of his colleagues. Megan and Andrew stood near the center of the room, accepting congratulations from a circle of admirers. The dinner itself was a carefully orchestrated performance. My father had arranged the seating to highlight the guests he deemed most important. Jessica and I were seated at a table far from the main party, alongside distant relatives and friends who didn't quite make the A-list. After the main course, my father stood to offer a toast. He spoke at length about Megan's accomplishments, her academic excellence, her compassion as a physician, her promising career. He praised Andrew's credentials and expressed his joy at welcoming another doctor into the family. "To the perfect couple," he concluded, raising his glass. "May your marriage be as successful as your medical careers." Applause filled the room. As dessert was being served, conversation flowed around our table. An older cousin asked what I was doing these days, giving me an opening to mention my business. "Actually, I just received some exciting news," I said, feeling a flutter of nervous energy. "A major retail chain has agreed to carry my apparel line in all their stores." "Oh, how wonderful," the cousin replied. "That sounds like quite an achievement." My father happened to be passing our table at that moment. He paused, having overheard the exchange. "Travis has a little t-shirt business," he explained to the cousin, his tone dismissive. "A hobby, really." "It is more than that, Dad," I said, striving to keep my voice even. "Northeast Retailers just signed a contract to carry my products in all 27 locations. This is a major opportunity for expansion." My father's expression tightened. I could see him calculating how to respond with others watching. Before he could speak, the cousin congratulated me enthusiastically. "Northeast Retailers. That is impressive. My daughter shops there all the time." Other guests at our table joined in with questions and congratulations. I explained the business model, the growth potential, the plans for expansion. For a few minutes I felt visible in a way I rarely did at family gatherings. My father stood silently, his jaw working back and forth, a sign of his growing irritation. Finally, he cut into the conversation. "Perhaps we could focus on the reason we are gathered here tonight," he said sharply. "Megan and Andrew have important news about their upcoming medical conference presentation." "I was just sharing some good news, Dad," I replied, a hint of challenge in my voice. "Just like Megan is sharing hers." Something flashed in my father's eyes, a dangerous spark I had seen only a few times before. The room seemed to quiet, as though everyone sensed the tension building between us. "Travis," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent room, "your sister is a celebrated physician saving lives. Andrew is a respected surgeon. They are presenting groundbreaking research next month. I felt heat rising in my face. And I am building a successful business. Different field, but still an achievement worth acknowledging." My father laughed, a short cutting sound that sliced through me. "A successful business. You print logos on t-shirts and sell them to teenagers. Megan performs complex surgeries. Andrew conducts medical research that will help thousands." Jessica placed her hand on my arm, a silent warning to disengage, but something in me refused to back down this time. "My business is profitable and growing," I said firmly. "The deal I just secured is worth potentially hundreds of thousands in revenue." My father's face darkened as he stepped closer to our table. The entire room was watching now, the engagement celebration forgotten in the tension of the moment. "She is a doctor," he said, pointing at Megan across the room. "You are just worthless." His voice carried clearly through the silence. A disappointment who refused to fulfill his potential and instead plays shopkeeper. The words hung in the air like poison. I heard my mother gasp. Megan's face drained of color. Andrew stared at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. Jessica's hand tightened on my arm. I looked around the room at the shocked faces of family, friends, relatives, and colleagues who had just witnessed my public humiliation. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others stared with morbid fascination. "Richard," my mother said softly, attempting to diffuse the situation. "Please." "No, Catherine," he interrupted. "It needs to be said. I have one child who makes me proud and one who wastes his time with frivolous pursuits." I stood slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. Jessica rose beside me, her expression a mix of fury and concern. "Thank you for making your feelings so clear, Dad," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "Congratulations again, Megan and Andrew. We will see ourselves out." Jessica and I walked through the silent room, past my stunned sister, past my father who stood rigid with anger, past my mother whose eyes pleaded with me to understand. No one tried to stop us. In the car, the careful composure I had maintained crumbled. My hands shook as I tried to insert the key into the ignition. "Let me drive," Jessica said gently, and I surrendered the keys without argument. We drove in silence for several minutes before the dam broke. Tears I had been holding back for years streamed down my face. Jessica pulled into an empty parking lot and held me, as I released years of accumulated pain and rejection. He has always thought that I said between ragged breaths, always seen me that way. But to say it out loud in front of everyone. Jessica wiped my tears with her thumbs, her own eyes glistening. "He is wrong, Travis. So incredibly wrong about you. And I promise you one day he will realize just how wrong he was." In that moment, something crystallized within me, a determination that went beyond proving my father wrong or earning his approval. I would build something successful not for him, but despite him. Not to win his acceptance, but to free myself from needing it. "Let us go home," I said finally. "We have a business to grow." The weeks following that disastrous dinner were a blur of activity. The Northeast retailer's deal required a significant scaling up of production. I secured a small business loan-leased warehouse space in an industrial park outside the city and hired 3 full-time employees to handle the increased workload. Jessica helped redesign our packaging and marketing materials to appeal to a broader customer base. My days started at 5 in the morning and often ended after midnight. I threw myself into work with an intensity fueled partly by passion and partly by the need to prove my father wrong. I ignored calls from my mother, deleted voicemails without listening to them, and declined the weekly family dinner invitations that arrived out of habit or obligation. The first order for Northeast retailers was our largest to-date custom apparel for all 27 locations, with the potential for regular reorders if sales performed well. We barely met the deadline, working around the clock during the final week before delivery. When the shipment went out, I collapsed onto the office sofa, physically and emotionally drained. "We did it," Jessica said, handing me a cup of coffee and sitting beside me. The first major milestone. The products hit the stores in October, just in time for the holiday shopping season. Sales exceeded projections by 30% in the first month. By December, Northeast retailers had placed a reorder twice the size of the initial shipment. We hired 2 more employees and invested in additional equipment. As the business grew, my relationship with my family deteriorated further. My father made no attempt to apologize for his public humiliation of me. My mother called repeatedly, her voicemails becoming increasingly desperate. "Travis, please call me back. Your father didn't mean what he said. He was just, you know how he gets when he is focused on Megan's accomplishments. Please, sweetheart, the family isn't the same without you." But it was the call from Megan that finally broke through my self-imposed isolation. She called on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing production schedules. "Travis," she said when I answered, her voice hesitant, "I have been trying to reach you for weeks." "I have been busy," I replied coldly. "The worthless shopkeeper has a business to run." She was silent for a moment. "I am so sorry about what Dad said. It was cruel and untrue." "But not surprising," I countered. "He has always made his feelings clear." "Can we meet somewhere?" she asked. "Please, I would like to talk to you in person." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee the following day. She arrived at the cafe looking different than I remembered, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, and a certain tension in her movements that hadn't been there before. "You look terrible," I said bluntly as she slid into the seat across from me. She attempted a smile. 60-hour work weeks will do that to you." We engaged in awkward small talk for a few minutes before she finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I wanted to tell you how amazing I think your business is," she said. "I went to the Northeast retailer's store near the hospital. Your display looks fantastic. Professional. Impressive. I was suspicious of this sudden interest. Did Mom put you up to this?" "No," Megan sighed. "Though she is worried sick about you. I came because I need to talk to someone who understands what it is like to be crushed under Dad's expectations." This caught me off guard. "You Dad's perfect doctor, daughter." Her laugh was bitter. "Perfect, Travis. I am miserable. I have been miserable for years." Over the next hour, Megan revealed a side of her life I had never seen. The constant pressure to maintain her status as the favorite child. The crushing weight of our father's expectations. The medical career she had pursued primarily to please him. "I never wanted to be a doctor," she confessed, staring into her untouched coffee. "I wanted to study art history. I had a whole application filled out for programs in New York and Chicago, but I never submitted them. I couldn't bear to disappoint him." "But you are so good at it," I said, confused. "You were always a natural." She shook her head. "I am good at memorizing things and following procedures. That doesn't mean I enjoy it or find it fulfilling. Every day I go to work, dreading what is ahead of me." She went on to explain that her relationship with Andrew was suffering under the strain of their demanding careers and our father's constant interference in their lives. "He is planning our whole future, where we will practice which hospital boards we should join when we should have children." She twisted her engagement ring anxiously. "Sometimes I feel like I cannot breathe." For the first time in our adult lives, I saw my sister not as a competitor or the family favorite, but as another victim of our father's unyielding expectations. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I am sorry, Megan. I had no idea." "How could you?" she replied with a sad smile. "From the outside, it looks like I have everything. The career, the fiancé, Dad's approval. But I would trade it all for a fraction of your courage. The courage to build your own path." That conversation marked the beginning of a new relationship between us. Megan began visiting the warehouse after her hospital shifts, genuinely interested in learning about the business. I introduced her to my employees and showed her around our operations. She seemed to come alive in this environment so different from the sterile hospital corridors. My mother eventually worked up the courage to visit the warehouse as well, though she made me promise not to tell my father. "He would not understand," she said as she wandered wide-eyed through the production area. "But I am so proud of what you have built, Travis. So very proud." As my business thrived, I found happiness in my personal life as well. After 2.5 years together, I proposed to Jessica during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. We celebrated with a small gathering of friends at our favorite restaurant. My mother and Megan attended, both swearing secrecy to my father. Meanwhile, Megan's life was unraveling. The pressure and unhappiness had begun affecting her work performance. She confided that she had made several minor medical errors due to exhaustion and anxiety. The hospital placed her on probation, requiring additional oversight of her cases. When my father learned of this, his reaction was explosive. He showed up at Megan's apartment, berating her for damaging the Parker reputation at the hospital he had helped build. "You are becoming as much of a disappointment as your brother," he shouted. Unaware that Megan was recording the conversation on her phone, a habit she had developed to help herself process his verbal attacks later. She played the recording for me the next day, her hands shaking. "This is what it has always been like," she said, "for both of us. The only difference is that I was more willing to sacrifice myself to meet his demands." The recording continued, with my father's voice growing more agitated. "I did not spend hundreds of thousands on your education for you to throw it all away with careless mistakes. What will my colleagues think? How will this reflect on me?" It was all about him. Always had been. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Megan was working a 36-hour shift when a patient under her care experienced complications. Though she followed all proper protocols, the patient's condition worsened significantly before another doctor intervened. The patient survived, but an internal review was initiated. The stress of the investigation, combined with years of suppressed unhappiness, triggered a complete breakdown. Megan collapsed in the hospital cafeteria, hyperventilating and unable to speak coherently. She was admitted to the psychiatric ward of a neighboring hospital, not her own, thankfully, where gossip would have spread instantly. Andrew, unable to handle the situation and the potential impact on his own career, broke off their engagement with a text message while she was still hospitalized. My father refused to visit her, telling my mother that Megan needed to pull herself together and stop being dramatic. I received the call from my mother at 2 a.m. "Travis, please," she sobbed into the phone. "Megan needs you. Your father won't go, and I cannot handle this alone." I drove to the hospital immediately, finding my once confident sister curled on a hospital bed, sedated and fragile, shattered something inside me. The competition, the resentment, the years of feeling second best, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of her suffering. I sat beside her bed until she woke hours later. When she saw me, tears filled her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I have ruined everything." I took her hand. "You haven't ruined anything, Megan. You have just been trying to live someone else's dream instead of your own." Over the next 2 weeks, I visited her daily. During these visits, Megan revealed the full extent of her suffering, years of anxiety attacks hidden from the family depression that had deepened with each achievement that brought her no joy, the constant fear of disappointing our place for father. "I cannot go back," she told me during one visit, her voice stronger than it had been since her admission. "Not to medicine, not to that life. I would rather die." The doctors recommended an extended medical leave and intensive therapy. When Megan was discharged, she faced another crisis. Andrew had already moved his belongings out of their shared apartment and informed the landlord they would not be renewing their lease. My father's response was to cut Megan off financially, his ultimate tool of control. "If she refuses to return to her career, she can support herself," he declared. "I will not subsidize this ridiculous breakdown." Without hesitation, I offered Megan my spare bedroom in the apartment I shared with Jessica. She accepted, tearfully moving in with little more than 2 suitcases of clothing and personal items. "It is temporary," she assured us. "Just until I figure things out." "Stay as long as you need," Jessica told her, We have plenty of room. The first few weeks of our new living arrangement were challenging. Megan slept most days, attended therapy sessions 3 times a week, and rarely left her room otherwise. Jessica and I gave her space, understanding that she needed time to heal. Meanwhile, my business continued to expand. The success with Northeast retailers had attracted attention from other retail chains. We secured contracts with 2 additional companies, necessitating further expansion. I leased a second warehouse space and hired a production manager to oversee daily operations while I focused on business development. Gradually, Megan began emerging from her depression. She started joining us for meals, helping with household chores, and occasionally accompanying Jessica on errands. One day, she asked if she could visit the warehouse again. "I need to get out of the apartment," she explained. "And I am curious to see how things have changed since my last visit." At the warehouse, Megan observed the production process with genuine interest. When one of our newer employees struggled with the heat press, she stepped in to help, quickly mastering the technique. "You are good at that," I remarked, surprised. She shrugged. "It is not brain surgery, but it is actually more satisfying." The following week, Megan asked if I had any positions available. "I need a job," she said. "Any job. I cannot keep living off your charity, and I refuse to crawl back to Dad for money." "Are you sure it would be entry-level work, nothing like what you are accustomed to?" "That is exactly what I want," she insisted. "Something completely different." I didn't have any openings at my company at that moment, but I reached out to contacts at various businesses. The manager at the Northeast retailer's flagship store had become a friend through our business relationship. When I explained the situation without revealing all the family drama, he offered Megan a position as a retail associate. "We need someone for the apparel department," he explained, "organizing inventory, helping customers, maintaining displays. It is minimum wage plus commission, but we offer benefits after 90 days. Megan accepted immediately. Her first assignment, folding and arranging the very hoodies my company produced. The irony was not lost on any of us. Dr. Megan Parker, with her medical degree from Johns Hopkins, was now folding sweatshirts at a retail store for minimum wage. But the most surprising part, she loved it. "No one dies if I fold something wrong," she told me one evening after her shift. "No one pages me at 3 in the morning because a display needs urgent attention. I help people find things that make them happy, not things that keep them alive. It is peaceful." She began to discover interests and talents that had been suppressed for years. She had an eye for visual merchandising that the store manager quickly recognized, putting her in charge of seasonal displays. She enjoyed the social aspects of retail, the interactions with customers, the camaraderie with coworkers who didn't care about her former title or family expectations. For nearly 3 months, we had no contact with our father. My mother visited secretly, always, with the nervous energy of someone committing a forbidden act. She brought updates. Dad was telling colleagues that Megan was taking a sabbatical to explore research opportunities. He had removed all photos of me from the family home. Then came the ambush. My father showed up at the Northeast retailer's store during one of Megan's shifts. A colleague had spotted her there and reported back to him, and he had come to talk sense into her. I received a panicked call from Megan during my lunch meeting with potential investors. "He is here," she whispered into the phone, making a scene, threatening to talk to management about my mental instability if I do not leave with him right now. I excused myself from the meeting and drove to the store, breaking several speed limits in the process. When I arrived, I found my father in the employee's break room, looming over Megan, who sat rigid in a plastic chair. "This ends now," he was saying as I entered. "I have arranged for you to meet with the hospital board next week. They are willing to overlook this episode, given your previous record and my influence." "She is not going back," I interrupted, causing both of them to turn toward me. My father's face contorted with rage. "This is none of your concern, Travis. This is about your sister's career, something you wouldn't understand. It is about Megan's life," I countered, moving to stand beside her chair, "and her right to choose what makes her happy." "Happy," he scoffed. "She was a respected physician. Now she folds clothes like an uneducated teenager. You call that Happiness. Yes, Megan said, her voice small but firm. For the first time in years, I am not having panic attacks in bathroom stalls or crying myself to sleep. So yes, Dad. This makes me happier than medicine ever did. My father turned his attention back to me, his eyes cold with fury. This is your doing. You have poisoned her against her calling out of jealousy and spite. Something in me snapped. Years of accumulated pain and rage boiled to the surface. Her calling or your obsession. You never cared what either of us actually wanted or needed. It was always about you, your reputation, your legacy, your ego. You pushed her until she broke, just like you tried to break me. The difference is that I escaped sooner. Escaped, he laughed bitterly. To what? A warehouse full of cheap merchandise, a small-time business that will be forgotten the moment it fails. I offered both of you a legacy of significance. You offered us a prison, I replied, and now we have both chosen freedom instead. My father stepped toward me, his finger jabbing the air between us. You ungrateful. That is enough, Richard. We all turned to find my mother standing in the doorway of the break room, her slight frame somehow filling the space with unexpected authority. Catherine, my father sputtered. What are you doing here? Following you, she replied calmly. Because I knew exactly what you would do when you found out where Megan was working. She moved into the room, positioning herself between my father and us. You will leave now, Richard. Both of our children are adults who can make their own choices. If you cannot respect that, then you will lose them both completely. And she added with a steadiness I had never heard from her before, you will lose me as well. The shock on my father's face would have been comical in any other circumstance. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Richard Parker was speechless. You do not mean that he finally managed? I have never meant anything more, my mother replied. I have stood by while you bullied and manipulated our children for years. I will not do it anymore. Come, Megan Travis. I will drive you home. As we followed our mother out of the break room, leaving my father stunned and alone, I felt a weight lifting that I had carried for as long as I could remember. The three of us walked through the store in silence, past the display of hoodies my company had produced, past the life my father considered worthless, towards something that felt remarkably like freedom. 6 months passed with no contact from my father. During that time, my business continued its upward trajectory. We expanded to a third warehouse and established an online presence that doubled our direct-to-consumer sales. A prominent business magazine featured me in their 30 under 30 list of promising entrepreneurs, with a photo spread showcasing our production facilities and product line. Megan thrived in her new environment. She was promoted to assistant manager of the apparel department, received a modest raise, and began taking night classes in fashion merchandising at the community college. The dark circles disappeared from beneath her eyes. She laughed easily, and often something I couldn't remember her doing since we were very young children. Jessica and I set a wedding date, choosing a small venue on the coast for the ceremony. Megan would be Jessica's maid of honor. My mother, who had separated from my father and moved into a small apartment of her own, would attend alone. He knows about the wedding, my mother told me during one of our weekly lunch dates. I left the invitation on the table before I moved out. I don't expect him to come, I replied. I just couldn't get married without at least giving him the option. She squeezed my hand. You have always been the more forgiving one. The Tuesday before the wedding, my assistant poked her head into my office. There is someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he is insistent. I looked up from my computer, annoyed by the interruption. Who is it? He says he is your father. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond. Should I tell him you are in a meeting? My assistant offered, clearly sensing my discomfort. No, I said finally. Send him in. The man who entered my office bore only a passing resemblance to the commanding figure who had dominated my childhood. My father looked older, diminished somehow. His shoulders slumped slightly beneath his expensive suit, and new lines had carved themselves around his mouth and eyes. Travis, he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. Dad, I replied neutrally. This is unexpected. He stood awkwardly just inside the doorway, glancing around at my office with its views of the production floor below. "This is impressive." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Would you like to sit?" He nodded, lowering himself into the chair with the careful movements of someone who has recently been ill. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several moments before he spoke again. "I received your wedding invitation. Mom said she left it for you." He nodded. "I wasn't sure if it was a courtesy or if you actually wanted me there." The honest answer was complicated. Part of me wanted my father at my wedding. Another part feared he would find some way to taint the day with his criticism or disapproval. "I wouldn't have sent it if I didn't want you to have the option of attending," I said carefully. He clasped his hands in his lap, staring down at them. "I have been doing a lot of thinking these past months. Therapy, actually. Your mother insisted before she would consider reconciliation. This surprised me. I couldn't imagine my father willingly sitting in a therapist's office exposing his inner thoughts to a stranger. The therapist helped me see some patterns in my behavior," he continued. "The way I projected my own insecurities onto you and your sister." I remained silent, unsure where this was heading. "My father," he said slowly, "was a factory worker who drank away half his paycheck. We lived in a small apartment above a laundromat. I was the first in my family to go to college, let alone medical school. No one thought I would amount to anything. This was new information. My father had rarely spoken about his childhood or his parents, who had both died before I was born. I promised myself my children would never know that kind of uncertainty or shame," he continued. "That they would have advantages I never had. Respect that I had to fight for." "So you pushed us to become doctors," I said, understanding dawning. "To continue what you had started." He nodded. "I convinced myself it was for your own good, that I knew what would make you successful and happy. I didn't consider that my children might have their own dreams, their own definitions of success." The admission hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology, but perhaps the closest my father had ever come to one. "I would like to attend your wedding," he said finally, "if you will still have me. And I would like to see Megan, if she is willing." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a delicate dance of reconciliation. My father met with Megan separately first, a coffee shop encounter that lasted 4 hours, and left both of them emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic. He toured my business facilities, asking genuine questions about operations and growth strategies. He made an effort to get to know Jessica beyond the superficial interactions of the past. It wasn't perfect. Decades of damage couldn't be undone in a matter of weeks. There were tense moments, old patterns that threatened to reemerge, hurt feelings that surfaced unexpectedly. But there was also a willingness to try that hadn't existed before. The wedding itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Jessica and I exchanged vows overlooking the ocean, surrounded by a small group of family and friends. My father sat beside my mother in the front row, not together as a couple, but as parents sharing in their son's milestone. At the reception, my father approached me, as I stood alone for a moment watching Jessica dance with her father. "You have built an extraordinary life, Travis," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A life entirely your own. I was wrong not to see its value sooner." I studied him for a moment, this man who had shaped so much of my identity, both in my attempts to please him and my rebellion against his expectations. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." He nodded, glancing across the room to where Megan stood laughing with a group of friends. "Your sister told me she is going back to school. Fashion design this time." "She is," I confirmed. "She starts the program in January. And she seems happy. Happier than I have seen her in years," I agreed. My father was quiet for a moment. "I spent so many years believing there was only one path to success and fulfillment. One right way to live. I never imagined my children would prove me wrong in the most convincing way possible by finding joy in paths I didn't even consider valid." He turned back to me. "I am proud of you, Travis. Not because of what you have built, though. That is certainly impressive. But because you had the courage to build it. Despite me. Not because of me." The words I had longed to hear for most of my life washed over me. and I found that they still mattered, not in the desperate way they once had, but as a healing balm for old wounds. "Would you like to see something?" I asked him. I led my father to a table where we had displayed photographs of our journey as a couple. Among them was a picture taken at my warehouse, Jessica and me, standing proudly before the first major shipment to Northeast retailers. "This was the turning point," I explained. "The moment everything changed for my business." My father studied the photo, taking in the stacks of boxes and the proud expressions on our faces. "I should have been there," he said quietly. "I should have supported you from the beginning." "You're here now," I replied. "That's what matters." As we rejoined the celebration, I watched my father approach Megan, engaging her in conversation about her upcoming studies. My mother danced with Jessica's uncle, looking younger and more carefree than I had seen her in years. And Jessica made her way back to me, slipping her hand into mine. "Happy?" she asked. I surveyed the room, my chosen family and my birth family, no longer separate entities, but gradually imperfectly merging into something new. "Yes," I answered honestly. "I really am." 1 year after our wedding, Jessica and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Lily. My business had expanded to include a design studio where we created custom apparel collections for national retailers. We had over 50 employees across 3 locations and were exploring opportunities for international distribution. Megan completed her first year of fashion design school with highest honors. She continued working part-time at Northeast retailers, having been promoted to department manager. Her designs were featured in the school's annual showcase, where she received attention from several local boutiques interested in carrying her work. Our mother flourished in her newfound independence. She returned to playing piano, teaching lessons to neighborhood children, and occasionally performing at community events. She and my father maintained a cordial relationship centered around family gatherings, but lived separately by mutual choice. And my father, he had perhaps undergone the most profound transformation of all. He reduced his surgical practice to part-time hours, using his newfound free time to volunteer at a community health center, serving low-income patients. He began mentoring young medical students, emphasizing work-life balance and the importance of following their own paths rather than others' expectations. On Lily's first birthday, we hosted a celebration at our home. As I watched my father gently holding his granddaughter, pointing out the shapes of clouds in the sky above our backyard, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. "It is strange," Megan said, joining me on the patio where I stood observing the party. "If you had told me 2 years ago that we would all be here like this, Dad playing with your baby, me designing clothes instead of prescribing medications, Mom playing piano again, I would have said you were delusional." I smiled. "Life has a way of surprising us." "Do you know what the strangest part is?" she continued. "I make less than a quarter of what I made as a doctor. I fold hoodies for retail display. I sit in classes with students 10 years younger than me, and I have never been happier." This was the profound truth at the heart of our family's transformation. Success and worth could not be measured by titles, income, or status. My sister, once the golden child destined for medical greatness, had found her joy in a path our father had once considered beneath contempt. And I, the disappointment, who refused to follow the prescribed route, had built something meaningful entirely on my own terms. "Travis," my father called from across the yard. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" I joined him at the edge of the garden, where he had been showing Lily the butterflies flitting among the flowers. "I have been thinking about expanding the community health initiative," he said, "reaching more underserved neighborhoods. But I need help with the business aspects, budgeting, grant writing, that sort of thing." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wondered if you might be willing to advise me. Use some of that business expertise to help make it sustainable." The request represented a seismic shift in our relationship. My father, who had once dismissed my business acumen as worthless, was now seeking my professional guidance. More importantly, he was inviting me to collaborate as an equal, recognizing the value of my different path. "I would be happy to help," I told him. "Let me know when you want to get started." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Jessica had put Lily to bed, I sat on our back porch watching the sunset. The journey from that humiliating family dinner to this peaceful moment had been neither straight nor easy. There had been painful confrontations, tearful reconciliations, and the slow, painstaking reconstruction of relationships damaged by years of misunderstanding. Yet through it all, one truth had emerged with crystal clarity. True worth comes not from external validation or adherence to others' expectations, but from the courage to chart your own course and the wisdom to recognize what actually brings you fulfillment. My sister no longer had doctor before her name. She folded hoodies at a retail store and studied fashion design. And the joy that radiated from her now was worth more than all the prestige her medical career had briefly provided. I had defied my father's narrow definition of success to build something entirely my own. Not to prove him wrong, though, that had been my initial motivation, but because it was the path that called to my heart and mind. As the final rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, I thought about the question my father had once asked in derision: what good is a business selling t-shirts compared to saving lives? The answer I now understood had nothing to do with the relative value of different professions. It had everything to do with authenticity, passion, and the fundamental right of every person to define success on their own terms. If you have ever been made to feel worthless because your dreams didn't align with someone else's expectations, I hope our story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by titles or others' approval. True success comes from having the courage to follow your own path, even when those closest to you cannot yet see its value. I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between pleasing others and following your authentic path? How did you handle it? Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family expectations, and share with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional dreams are worth pursuing. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth is not determined by anyone but yourself.